A leak in the International Space Station, an admission by Secretary Rubio on Capitol Hill under oath that many missed, and the president walks out of an interview. What it tells us about the administration and the state of American journalism. There was a lot happening in that interview, and we're going to get into it. I'm so glad to see you, everybody. Welcome to Scoop. This is our scoop on the week ahead of news. I'm Jenna. This is SmartHER News. I'm glad you're here. And we have a lot to dig into today, including that leak in the International Space Station that makes you think, well, who knew? Turns out this has been a concern for a couple years. So we're going to get to that in a moment. I just want to show you real quick before we get there a couple of these other stories, including just a very fast soundbite from President Trump as part of this interview that's getting a lot of attention because he ends up walking out and because it gets contentious. He also says this early on in the interview, and I don't want to miss it like everybody else is.
Don't make a deal. We may do it or we may just watch it. You know, we have cameras on it all over it. If anybody walked there, if you walked over there, I would be able to read your first name on your lapel. And these are cameras up in space. It's pretty amazing technology. Space Force. We have cameras all over the site.
Shh. Do you hear everyone in the background go, shh, Mr. Shh. It reminds me of, remember when the pilot was missing and he was missing in this rural area of Iran. No one can find him. And the president makes a reference like, oh, but we can see his heartbeat or so, there was a revealing of a tool that we may have as part of the CIA for surveillance that maybe wasn't exactly something that we wanted to share with the entire planet. This reminds me of that well, first of all, if you feel like you're being surveilled, I guess you have your answer. This is specifically related to Iran. He was asked a question about the Iran nuclear sites that America has bombed and what to do about them. So this was part of the conversation. And so he's saying that, listen, maybe we'll do something about it. Maybe we'll reach an agreement on it. And if not, we're going to watch it. And guess what? We can read the lapel off your shirt if you're walking there. So now we know. So now everybody knows, eyes on the prize there. And the president has talked a little bit about that yet again. Nothing specific, but just something to know about. I have a couple things in our broadcast today that I just think are important to have on your radar. That's one of them. I don't know exactly the weapon he's talking about. Surely there are people that do. Now we know a little bit about how advanced our technology is. Again, this interview was explosive in a lot of ways, but there was a lot happening, including some interruptions that, when they're part of an interview, create a more tense environment. So we're going to do a little media analysis of that because it is a clip that's getting a lot of attention, and especially this week as the president and the White House are trying to navigate a lot more questions coming their way about the future and some of these very big stories, including the war with Iran. Before we get to that, it's funny how social media can actually spark curiosity and a bigger story. And that's what happened with our team. So we were sharing some stories going into this week. There's this beautiful video. Let me show it to you from astronaut Jessica Meir. It's of the Northern Lights. She's in the International Space Station and she's witnessing this incredible event, and she shares it. And a member of our team says, look at this is amazing. And I read what's happening on X. What's actually being said there? And so this is the statement. There's a lot going on right now on the space station, she writes. But fortunately, we are all safe and witnessed a spectacular southern aurora, pardon me, not northern lights, southern aurora show yesterday, thanks to a recent solar event. Let's show that again for those of you who are watching. It is beautiful. But what is she talking about? Fortunately, we are all safe. That seems like big news. So here's what they're actually talking about. This is actually a statement coming from NASA. And I think it's easier to read this than try to sort of summarize it. The bottom line is, though, that there's a leak that we've been watching, or leaks in the International Space Station. And why this matters is that there's been questions over the years about the stability and the safety and the age of the International Space Station. It is expected to last, quote unquote last, it's expected to be in operation over the next couple of years, 2030, 2032. But we are in 2026, mid 2026. So it's not a long time. So imagine if you were driving a car and you're like, I could use it for the next couple of years. But then after that, we're not so sure. It's been so critical and important to research, and obviously having astronauts in orbit for a period of time as we continue space exploration. So apparently since 2019, there's been some concerns about leaks, and they've been identified and they've been fixed. But here's what happened last week. There was a noted increase of the previous leak rate. So the leak that's being observed is now growing a little bit bigger, indicating or identified a new suspected leak area in the space station. Following this observation, it's basically the Russian astronauts and the Russian scientists that are observing this made the decision to begin work towards a more extensive inspection and structural repair on Friday morning. So this is what's happening on the International Space Station. This revised approach does a couple of different things, yada, yada, yada. Don't think we're all not space engineers, but the bottom line is that they cut a bracket to better access an area to identify this possible leak. So imagine that you're in the International Space Station, you're a couple months into your 6 month stay, and they're like, guess what? There's a leak. It's getting worse. We don't know how bad it is. And so, in response to that, what NASA tells the astronauts to do is to get the four SpaceX Crew 12 members and the NASA astronaut Chris Williams, who flew to the station with the Russian rocket, the Soyuz, um, to take a quote unquote heightened safety posture known as safe haven inside the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft during the procedure. So they don't say the words evacuate the International Space Station because they didn't leave, but they basically all moved inside the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft during this procedure just in case. So that happened while we were all going into our weekend. Can you imagine that? And turns out they're going to observe this area a little bit more. Everybody was able to go back into the International Space Station. NASA's going to continue their work, they say, with the Russian counterparts, along with international partners to support the space station and try to present a resolution in this matter. So that just gives us an idea of sort of the high stakes that are happening in parts of, well, I wouldn't even say parts of the planet, but these bigger stories that no one's really paying attention to. Something happened at the International Space Station. Basically, everything that we're talking about in the news when it comes to politics and election and what's happening even with conflict suddenly changes. And there's not a lot of stories like that, but this would be one of them. And look, it sort of just could pass us by, except for this beautiful picture that was posted by an astronaut mentioning it that sparked curiosity that led to a bigger story. So social media is not all bad, is one of the big takeaways. And number two takeaway is this is interesting. There's been a leak for a couple of years. It's going on 7 years of watching these leaks in the International Space Station. The bigger story there, why does it matter? Well, how long and how good is this space station to continue to support this very important space travel and research that we're continuing to do? So I wanted to make sure that was on your radar, especially on a week when we are going to get an announcement for the new Artemis team. So we had Artemis 2, now we're moving into Artemis 3. We're going to find out who the astronauts are there that are going to be part of this new team. We're going to 4 astronauts are going to be named this week by NASA. Their job is going to be similar in the sense that they are going to be part of this multi-step approach to sending astronauts to the moon again for a moon landing in 2027 or thereabouts. It's not exactly the same mission as Artemis 2. We're not going around the moon. We're not going the farthest into space that we've ever gone before. It's going to be low Earth orbit, but it's part of this, again, multi step approach to try to get astronauts into space. So we'll get those new names and we'll be off on focusing on a new mission. In the meantime, we'll keep an eye on what's happening with the International Space Station. Back here at home, back here on planet Earth, I'm going to bring you to Capitol Hill because there were a couple really important testimonies that happened on Capitol Hill, hearings of very high profile cabinet members that we talked about last week on SmartHER News, that now we have a week of looking through some of what was said. And what we tend to do is listen very specifically to these hearings. So we'll often listen to 2, 3 hour hearings. Sometimes it's longer so that we understand what's actually being said on the record and not relying just on sound bites. So let's go to Secretary Rubio on Capitol Hill last week. He had some very interesting admissions that are not getting a lot of attention in the broader news landscape for a variety of different reasons. There's a lot of things going on. One thing I want to mention to you, speaking of things that are flying in the air, is this soundbite that's, again, not getting the attention that perhaps it deserves and could be something that could affect us here stateside. He's talking about Iran and Iran's fleet of drones. Take a listen to this.
Of drones, because these are easy to make. We all know it's not an Iran challenge. This is a global challenge, and it's playing out every single day around the world. I mean, Mexican cartels are using UAVs against each other. We should imagine at some point may even use it against our interests. So this is a pervasive problem around the world. The economics of it are something we have to solve for.
So, speaking of these cheaply made, high volume drones, there's a lot of them. Doesn't mean that they're particularly advanced drones, but if you have a swarm of drones, that certainly is something to contend with. And that part about the Mexican cartels, which really wasn't part of the question, came up. And this is what I wanted to flag for you. The fact that he said, wait a minute, these Mexican cartels are using them against each other and could potentially use it against us. Just again, something to put on your radar, no pun intended, as we're thinking about what could be the next big story. The bulk of this testimony, which was really about appropriations, it's about the money that the State Department is going to get, but it's the opportunity for Secretary Rubio to be in front of his former colleagues and our representatives to answer questions about what's happening and what's going to happen next and why are we doing the things that we're doing. So at times this exchange can get contentious, but because there's a little bit of more time than, let's say, a cable news interview, there often are these admissions that come up that get breezed over. And there was an exchange here with Senator Mike Lee, a Republican from Utah, where Secretary Rubio, for the very first time, maps out in the first way that I've ever heard this, what actually the Iranian government looks like. So I want you to think about it for a second here. There's all this talk about negotiations. How are negotiations happening? What's going on? What's the timeline? How are they going to be successful? When does this war end? These are really critical and important questions. But have we really stopped to ask the question, well, what is it like to negotiate with Iran? In many ways, it's been a closed country to us. So, how exactly is it structured? And when we talk about negotiations, our point of reference is the American government, how the American government is set up. But that's not how the Iranian government is set up. It's completely different. And this is some of the insight that Marco Rubio gives in his description of the structure of the government that I think is really important. But it's what he says at the end that perhaps is the most important fact to know when it comes to negotiations with Iran. So I'm going to start and stop this soundbite a little bit, but I want you to hear as much as possible so you get a full picture of what the United States is actually confronting.
So the way to think about it is the following. You have the supreme leader, and understand that at the end of the day, the supreme leader in their system there really is no analogy to it in our system or anybody else's system. It is a theological office. It was the head of the Islamic republic in the sense of the ultimate decision maker. And every major decision has to be run by them. They are advised by a council. It's not clear if it's 6 people or 8 people, but there is a council made up of both IRGC and other elements of the regime.
Let me stop you right there. IRGC, we're talking about the elite military force of Iran. So we have this council that has not only representatives from the military, but other representatives as well.
Regime that surround that supreme leader. And ultimately, that council has to sign off on anything. And then there are the people you see on TV, like Arachi, who's out there every single day, and Golubov, who's the speaker of the Majils, who's been playing a pretty prominent role. And
these are the people that you're going to see quoted often by the American press. They're on social media actively. They're forward-facing. You see them on the media. He mentioned the foreign minister, Aragachi. He's the one that went to China to meet with representatives there. So these are not names that we're totally familiar with all the time, but just want to give you a little insight into.
The ones that they have sent to negotiations and so forth. It is our view of the system, as we understand it, and as it's been expressed to us both by the intermediaries and by Iran directly, that what Arachi and Golubov bring or take from us, they then have to run back to this council and ultimately get guidance from them. And that process oftentimes takes 3 to 5 days to get a response. Now, some of it is logistical. They're operating probably using couriers and things of this nature. Part of it is internal fissures on exactly what they should agree to or not agree to. I think the second point that needs to be driven in this regard is that there is evidence that there are communications issues within the regime as well. All the problems Iran had before this conflict not only are still there, but they're worse. All the things that led to the protests, all of these are worse than they were before. And I think there's definitely elements within that regime that understand it. And then there are other elements of it that are more immune to it and perhaps more resistant to making agreements. And so what we are working through is in many cases, is delays in getting the responses to people. And this is why you see reporting about there might be a deal in the next few days, because internally it takes time to get responses from them, sometimes upward to 5 or 6 days.
Undoubtedly, they're using that to their advantage, sort of like the car dealer where the salesman has to go talk to his manager, make you wait and think about it for a while.
Even more complicated than that.
Even more complicated than that.
Secretary Rubio smiles. Even more complicated than your local car dealership, but fair example. example. He tries to validate a fellow Republican in that. How fascinating is that, though? Think about that for a second. Think about how fast the press is moving here, whether you're talking about conservative media, liberal media, mainstream media, any of it. Does anyone stop to think how long it takes to get a response from the Iranians? And if what Secretary of State Marco Rubio is saying is true, which could be upwards of 5 days, imagine how much the world changes in 5 days. So, what you started with on Monday, you don't have to wait till Friday to get a response. Think about the pace of negotiations in that. That's a very powerful insight. Also, the fact that because of, he didn't say it here, but because of security concerns, because the top members of the Iranian government have been targeted, they are not using traditional forms of communication. So not only do they have different ideas about what should happen, but they're communicating via courier. Is it a bike messenger that's trying to get from one place to the other? Who knows how that's actually getting passed to each other? Imagine the game of telephone that's taking place. This is not to I'm not sharing this to justify how long these talks are taking, whether or not, America has been successful in these talks. It's simply a really interesting added context to a big news story that's missing. How many of us, myself included, thought that it could take 3 to 5 days to get an answer from someone in this technological environment? I'm thinking that there are ways that they're communicating in real time. That is not what Secretary Rubio is describing. So when you see headlines like you did this morning with an exchange of fire between Iran and Israel that's threatening to bring us back into war, at the same time that you're hearing that, well, maybe ceasefire negotiations are making progress. Now we have better context of understanding, well, how do these things flare up and then flare up and flare down? And how do they start interrupting the communication of what is possible? So if you have a deal that you think you're getting together, and then there's somehow an exchange of fire in two groups that you weren't expecting, now everybody has to go back to everybody again in this same snail pace to try to rally around a single issue. This probably is an argument for what we've seen in the past, which is Iranian representatives go to like Pakistan, where they're sitting, not face to face with the United States, not yet, but as a way to try to speed up this process. But if all those representatives, including the Ayatollah and the high ranking members of Iran's elite military force, are not nearby, then the people that the United States are even trying to negotiate with in real time don't have the power to make a deal. That's so different than the way that our government is set up. Think about the way that we even think about negotiations when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. We haven't had this exact situation. So I want you to put that in your back pocket. It matters because it provides some insight into the challenges around trying to get a peace deal here as this conflict continues week after week. The effect of the Iran war is a big topic of conversation and what it means for the American people, specifically when it comes to areas like fuel prices and also the job market. I just want to show this to you real quick because this came out on Friday as well. This is our jobs report. I want to bring your attention to this graph on our screen, which is showing whether or not we have job growth or a negative amount of jobs, which we can see when you see the bar graph fall below the bottom line. What's important to see here about the job report that we got on Friday is that it was stronger than expected. And really, these reports are not judged by a number, they're judged on how much they missed or beat expectations. The jobs report just this past Friday, looking back on May, shows that we beat expectations as an economy 2 times over. So we were more than 2 times better than what was expected by economists. So that was what would be described as a big beat. At the same time, if you look back on previous months, there's always revisions. Sometimes those revisions show fewer jobs created, sometimes they show more. In this case, we actually showed more jobs created in the other months, March and April, than previously expected. And so, what the takeaway is here from analysts and from those that are specifically covering business news is that although there are challenges and headwinds to the US economy, when it comes to the job market, we continue to see this job growth happen. That's seen as a positive sign. It also means we may not see lower rates. That's sometimes used as lowering borrowing rates as a way to kind of stimulate the job market. We may not see that as a possibility as much as we did before because the job market's looking more stable. That can all change in a minute. It just takes one bad jobs report and that changes everything. And there is a question about this that I think is worth raising, which is we did see some higher hiring in leisure and hospitality. And I wonder if that's a little boost going into the summer that is fleeting. That's not permanent jobs. It's people coming into the workforce, as getting off of college and working for the summer, or staff that was stripped down to the bare bones in February. Now we're staffing back up because it's going to be a busy season. So I think there's a couple of things to watch here, but I just wanted to make you aware because I know the economy was what actually links us all. And we really want to pay attention to how do these big stories affect us on a daily basis. Gas prices is one of them. We continue to see higher gas prices in general, overall. And we're always keeping an eye on the job market. And we're just wondering, we're always asking the question if there is uncertainty in the global landscape, how that affects decisions from businesses and from leaders about what they're going to do moving forward. The question of the Iran war and what it means for the American people, when will it end, is a big question for the president. And it was a main focus of an interview with Meet the Press over the past week, an interview that aired on Sunday that is getting more headlines for what happened between the interviewee and the president rather than the substance of the interview. So, we're going to talk a little bit about this because the president did something that we often don't see from him. It is true that he can be more combative in interviews. He likes a little jousting with the press. I don't think I'm over exaggerating that. He likes that as part of how he operates. Sometimes he has this very kind of joking quality with the press, and other times it can be a little bit more combative. And so this interview was with Kristen Welker of NBC Meet the Press. And according to her account, she says that the White House invited her to join the president on his travels so that they could sit down and have an interview. This is not uncommon. The White House, any White House, can reach out to whatever news program when they want to get a big interview and talk about what they want to talk about. They could invite someone to come along and you're going to get a special exclusive interview with the president of the United States. Nobody else is going to get it. You're going to get it. And we would really like to talk about why the president is traveling, for example, jobs, what he's doing for farmers in America. And you may have to ask one or two questions about that, but then you get the opportunity to ask whatever questions you want. This interview was in an area, it kind of looks like you'll see it, looks a little bit like the inside of a barn or some sort of working area. But the key part of this is it had an aluminum roof, tin roof, easier to say. And because of that, and because of the weather, the interview is constantly disrupted because they start the interview very calmly. They're talking about Iran, and then this storm comes in. It feels like a movie. And the rain is so loud that they actually have to stop the interview several times because, according to Kristen Welker, she can't even hear the president who's sitting right across from her. Imagine that. Also, he's not a quiet guy. So they can't, sometimes they're not even able to hear each other. And there's this huge storm that's sort of coming and going. They're stopping and starting. And at one point, they kind of are laughing about it. At another point, this is getting frustrating and they don't really know what to do. Sound is one of the most critical things you can have in an interview. Your lighting can be bad. Your camera work can be bad. If you do not have the audio clear, you do not have the interview. So this is a major concern. This isn't just like, oh, there's a little bit of rain. It's that how bad is this rain and can we actually correct it in edit so that we could hear the president and hear what the interview is saying? But this is part of this dynamic that's taking place. So they're getting a little bit stop, start, long interview. It looks like it's hot in there. It's all of these things that are affecting this dynamic. And then there's an audio issue and they have to stop. They have to interrupt the president, replace a battery, and get back on track. This is all very difficult. I can't explain how difficult this is to be interrupted. Being interrupted once, no big deal. But you're really having a conversation. You're, as an interviewer, you are creating a rapport with that person over and over again. It doesn't matter if you've known them for a couple years. In that moment in the conversation, it's like having a conversation at work and someone enters into the office or someone interrupts you in the middle of like a deep thought. It's hard to get back on track. So I want you to really understand the dynamics of the interview. At the same time, I also want you to understand the dynamics that the administration is facing because there is added pressure on this administration and this could have affected the interview. And these are all really important news items. Yes, it's true. The jobs report was better than expected. And the president wanted to talk a little bit about that. But I want you to think about this. The president's going into this week. He's turning 80 this weekend. Big birthday. There's a big fight of the UFC on the White House lawn that's long been anticipated. Late last week, going into this week, there's actually a lawsuit trying to prevent that from happening. Just a heads up on that. But there's obviously events. It happens to coincide with the president's birthday, which happens to coincide with Flag Day. This is all ahead of the celebration of America's 250th birthday, a huge deal. It's clearly something that the president is very invested in, wants to make it a really big deal for the United States, feels really passionate about it, talks about it a lot. So he has that going on. Birthdays can add a little something too. I don't know how he feels about turning 80, but it can always add a little something. So we want to consider that. Separately, though, because Congress is back in session last week, we did see a few affronts to the administration that where Republicans crossed party lines and joined Democrats to refute the administration on 2 points. One has to do with what's called the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is legislation that would require that people show up with proof of U.S. citizenship to vote in elections, amongst other things. It's been controversial. It hasn't been able to move forward. And also this past week, there was a vote that basically showed that it wasn't going to move forward again. This is a huge hit to this administration. They feel like this is really important. And if they don't do this now, with Republicans having the majority in the House and the Senate, that means it's not going to move forward at all. So that could be a loss, something in the loss category. I don't know where it goes from here, but as of right now, it's not moving forward. In the House of Representatives, we saw a vote basically having to do with the War Powers Act. Remember, we talked about the president has the ability to act unilaterally when it comes to protecting the United States and our national security interests, and he can do so with some freedom for a certain period of time, but then he has to go to Congress to get further authorization. The vote in the House of Representatives is largely symbolic at this point because it doesn't actually lead to the president being restricted in any way. But because some Republicans joined Democrats to vote to restrict the president's authority here, restrict his powers, that can move over to the Senate, and it could lead to more restrictions on the White House about the way forward when it comes to Iran. The White House has a lot of responses to that, but right now it's the public nature of this refutation of the president's agenda, including by several Republicans, that got a lot of attention. So largely symbolic, but also part of the story. So we have multiple parts of this. We're in a pressure environment. Also, one has to ask the question, did the president imagine going into celebrating our Independence Day, America 250, with a war ongoing? Did he actually anticipate this happening? Is the length of this conflict also a problem for him? And this is where Kristen Welker really spent the bulk of her time. I watched the full interview, which lasted about 45 minutes or so. The bulk of her time is spent on Iran and the way forward in Iran. And she asked the same question in a variety of different ways because she's really pressing the president on the timeline. Why is it taking so long? What's actually going on? And he's really pushing back, saying these things take time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. We have a couple of different ways we want to handle it. And this seems fine at the moment. But there's another big story in the background here, too. And she ends up switching to that after these multiple interruptions and what's happening with Iran. And the president clearly doesn't want to be pushed on the timeline. He feels like he said his piece. But this is still, if you look across, again, the media landscape, this seems to be the story that keeps on coming back. It's taking so long. It's taking so long. And the American public may have those questions too. But it's a lot of rinse and repeat of that question. The other big story in the background to all of this is, remember, there was a settlement announced between the Department of Justice and the president, his sons, and the Trump Organization. This settlement, based on a lawsuit that the Trump's family and business tax returns were made public illegally, is to create a anti-weaponization fund that would allow people to apply for reimbursement if they feel like the Justice Department was weaponized against them in any significant way. We had no idea how this fund was going to be monitored, how it was going to be set up. We've never seen a settlement like this before. It's been challenged in court. There's all sorts of things happening with this. It did not go quietly into the night. It now has become a really big issue that even the acting attorney general, Todd Blanche, has had to talk about in front of Congress last week. And in that testimony, he makes a shocking admission there.
Mr. Attorney General, I wanted to ask a few questions about the anti-weaponization fund. We know that the department has agreed to pause this effort until at least June 12th. I wanted to ask what your plans were for the fund after June 12th.
So thank you. So look, we're not moving forward with the fund. You're right that there's a date that in the case in the Eastern District of Virginia in June, but we are not moving forward with the fund, period.
Not moving forward ever.
Correct.
Oh, there's no more fund then.
Well, to the extent there was a fund, and remember the fund wasn't set up yet.
That was really big news. So Kristen Welker, at this point of the interview, and I'm going to play a large portion of it because I want you to see this interaction. We're going to talk about it afterwards, is trying to get an answer from the president about whether or not this fund is really not happening, to get him on the record. But it starts dissolving into a conversation about who hypothetically would have access to the fund that may or may not exist anymore. So I want you to think about how how it's stacked. Okay. So we're asking a hypothetical question about whether or not those that have pled guilty to crimes related to January 6th could also ask for reimbursement into the fund. This was a big talking point by Democrats. And now Kristen Welker's asking it as well, like who has access to the fund, which is a totally valid question. But we actually don't know if the fund is going to happen or if it's going to exist at all. So here's the section of the interview. In case you can't see any of it, as far as what happened with Iran, I don't think we have any big headlines on that from the president, except for that top secret weapon that we have or surveillance to read someone's lapel. I want you to see this exchange. And we're going to talk about what is it telling us about the administration and what does it tell us about American journalism? What mistake do I see, with all due respect to Kristen Welker, who I admire very much and who often has these good conversations with the president, that I've also made as a journalist that we have to be really careful about if we're trying to win back the public trust. So let's take a listen here.
Because they were frightened. They went down. They were ushered into a building. Many of them were arrested without even going into the building.
Okay with them receiving taxpayer dollars?
The people were destroyed by dirty cops and by weaponization. Many of those people should be compensated. Now, with that being said, as I understand it, the weaponization fund was going to set up a group of people, people that could be picked by anybody, fair people, smart people, and they will go on an individual case basis.
Okay.
Now, I don't know what's going to happen with the weaponization fund. I love the idea because people like you, the fake, dirty press, the crooked press, people like stupid Biden, he's not smart enough to know what's going on, but people that surrounded him, surrounded his beautiful, resolute desk in the Oval Office, what they did to the lives of people, they destroyed people. They sent people to jail who did nothing
All
wrong.
right, just to be very clear, there's no evidence of what you're saying, but let
There's
me
a
ask
lot
you
of
about
evidence.
Todd Blanche. Let me ask you about
Listen
Todd
to me.
Blanche.
Listen to me.
Do you hear the rain? It's almost like we're getting elevated in the conversation. Now it's getting a little tense. The president is attacking the character of Kristen Welker. That's going to get worse. You're going to see this. But now you have the rain on the roof in the background. And she says this, there's no evidence. We're going to get back to that phrase and why I think that's important to watch. But let's continue.
Let's talk
There's
about Todd
tremendous evidence. There's nothing
What's
but
not been
evidence. The
presented in
election
a
was
court of
rigged.
law.
It was a dirty election.
Mr.
And it's
President,
happening again right now
You've
in
never
California.
presented evidence
It's happening
that the
right now
2020
in
election was
California.
rigged.
Right now, it's look at what's
Where's
happening
the
in
evidence
California.
to that?
It's
The
4
Republicans
days.
are doing well in California.
California, it's no, they're not. They're dropping fast because it's a rigged election. Let me tell you, it's 4 days, and they aren't even close
That's
to
how they-
coming up
that's
with.
how they
You
count
know
the
why
votes
they're
in
doing that? Because
California.
they're cheating on the election.
Do you have evidence
They're-
to support
all I have
that?
to do is look. All I have to
but
do is
that's
look.
not
And I
evidence.
listen. And I listen to people. And let's see what happens.
But sir, that's not evidence.
Do you think it's appropriate
That's how they
that they
count the votes in
Do you
California.
think it's appropriate that they have an election and 5 days later they're nowhere close to picking a
State
winner?
and local officials acknowledge they are slow. They're urging.
No, they're crooked.
They're urging the
crooked.
votes to be counted quick. That's how they vote
They're
in
crooked,
California.
just like you're crooked. Your press is crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked.
To be fair, I'm not crooked, but let's
Really?
Let's
Well, you
continue.
play right into their hands. then.
Let's continue.
You're either crooked or you're stupid.
Let's
you play
continue.
right into their hands with this rap. You know that these elections are rigged. Your network knows that they're rigged. You know that I won an election in a landslide, and I got 94% bad press.
But Mr. President,
You know why I
you've
got
never
that?
presented
Because you have no
evidence.
credibility.
But you've never presented evidence that it was rigged. Let's keep talking about. I want to talk about Todd.
You
Blanche.
have more evidence. There's more evidence than ever presented.
Let's talk
Your
about
elections
You
in
like
this
to
country, we're
point.
like a third world country.
But, sir-
Your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and
Mis-
Meet the Press is crooked,
Mr.
and so
President-
is ABC and CBS and CNN.
But, Mr.
You're
President-
one-sided crooked networks. All right, let's call it quits because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
I've sat in the
traveled
rain with
all.
you.
I know. I
I've sat in the
traveled
rain
all the
with
way
you
to
for an hour,
Wisconsin.
on and off in the rain, and I've given you enough time. You ought to straighten out your press because you know what?
Mr.
A
President,
country can never be
We
great
traveled
with a
all-
dishonest
Listen,
press.
we
Come on, let's
traveled
go.
all the way to Wisconsin for this interview. I spoke with President Trump on Saturday, and we both acknowledged the complications during the interview posed by the rain. He agreed to sit down with me for another Meet the Press interview.
Thoughts on how that went down? I wanted to get her statement at the end there because I do think that's important. Sometimes things can go off the rails in an interview, and then there's a conversation afterwards. This has happened to me as well, where you reach out one side or the other, you get back together. I think it's important that the president says he'll do another interview with Meet the Press. There's a couple things just to pull out of this conversation. In general, I'm often asked, well, how do you feel about how the president behaves with journalists and the name calling and stupid and crooked and all these things? In general, I believe in professionalism on all sides, which means that we behave in a professional way that feels worthy of our positions. And that is something that politicians and members of the press share, which is that we represent and work for the public. And our job is to do right by the public. And anything that distracts from that, to me, is inappropriate. Period. Period. So it is true that at SmartHER News, I haven't made a comment every single time the president has said something about the press. In general, that's how I feel. It is also not new news that the president behaves this way sometimes with the press. And when he gets frustrated, you see this. That's not accepting it, approving it, but it's also not new news. This is what we've seen for the better part of a decade at this point now. What is interesting in what I believe is the takeaway here is that we had a conversation that we watched that basically we could slice and dice and pick up and move back to 2020 or 2021 and have exactly the same conversation. That comment from Kristen Welker that there's no evidence, to her, she's trying to present the other side. The president says there's election fraud, there's problems with the election overall, and that even in California, we're seeing those problems again. She's trying to present balance. And she keeps on saying that there's no evidence. In this day and age, though, it's a tricky thing to talk about in this particular way. There's plenty of ways to try to set the record straight or rebut the president. But as a journalist, you have to think about what is your goal in this interview. If it's to get some real comments about the de-weaponization fund, you have to try to steer back to that. But the more you double down on saying that the president is wrong when he feels he's right, it gets into a situation that's not beneficial to anybody. But I've been there before. I know what that's like. There's a very specific interview that I've never forgotten. It was with the head of the Republican National Committee at the time. It was before the 2016 election. I can't remember the topic. I'm sure I could find it on the interwebs of the internet at some point. I was also like 9 months pregnant. I was live on television, and there was something controversial that came up that I had to ask him about. And he provided an answer that to me was not an acceptable answer. So I followed up with another question, and he did sort of the same thing. Now I'm starting to get angry. So now I'm doubling down on it because I'm thinking, wait a minute, you're not answering the question. And that dissolved into something that was not productive for the audience. And at the end of the day, that is who we serve, which is the audience. It may be really obvious that the person that's answering a question when you're a journalist is not answering it truthfully or honestly, or is even dealing in fact. But you're there to get them on the record and their belief. And that's part of your reporting so that you can show your audience how they feel about it. You have access to someone that your audience doesn't have access to on a regular basis. So you want to highlight what they feel on this topic. Now, if you're going to do other reporting later, if you're going to bring in a panel to dispute what the president said about election fraud, bring in the panel. But you get in trouble, and this is a difference of opinion I have with a lot of people about fact checking someone on the spot when you're also trying to report. She's saying there's no evidence. And as you heard her say, because there's been no lawsuits that have been brought that have continued in the court of law, that where evidence was strong enough that a judge said, oh, there's election fraud here and we can prosecute it. It did not rise to the level of prosecution. But for the president of the United States, he doesn't really care about that. He believes, regardless of that, he feels that the system is rigged against him. He thinks the political system is rigged against him. The Department of Justice is rigged against him. The media is rigged against him. And he believes that. So when you say to him, there's no evidence of that, it's hard to say to someone, there's no evidence of what you believe. If I'm talking to someone that believes that the sky is purple, and I say, well, wait a minute, the sky's blue because everyone thinks it's blue. There's no evidence that the sky is purple. But they say, listen, the sky's purple. This is why I believe that. At a certain point, I have to switch gears because then I'm just going back and forth with them on color that we're never going to reconcile on. And now we've wasted this time talking about the sky is purple when maybe we need to talk about other things. So this was a moment where I saw that trap where it's hard as a journalist not to pull yourself away and think, what is my role here? And this is where I do see the American press getting wayward. A lot of the press will say things about being an advocate for the American people and holding leaders in power to accountability. And they interpret that as fact checking someone on the spot and saying, you're wrong because of this. But is that really the job of a journalist? Is the job of a journalist to tell someone that's in power that they're wrong, or to show the audience, present to the audience reporting that allows the audience to come to their own conclusion? And if the facts suggest that what that person is saying is wrong, then what's more powerful, the journalist saying it or the people understanding it? When we get into the situation of advocacy and fact checking by the press, we actually lose authority with the public because the public doesn't want to be told what to do. They just want to know what's going on. And the question here about the de-weaponization fund is important. That's almost $2 billion of your money that could be going to people potentially that have pled guilty to certain crimes. We actually have no idea if that's true. We don't even know if this fund is going to continue. But that's important. That's your money. And so, was that the most productive use of time for both of these individuals that had this very rare platform to work on behalf of the American people? The president, what I say, and this is again my own analysis, and I don't share my opinion on really anything except the state of journalism. I always remember what our journalism professor told us in grad school. She said, if you see someone with a red dress walking down a red carpet, your job is not to say she's wearing a red dress. Your job is to tell the audience what they can't see. How many sequins are on it? How long did it take to make the dress? Who is the designer? Why is she wearing it? Your job is to fill in the blanks. It's not to state the obvious. And I think of that often in this time period where we feel a little bit lost in the media. Like, how do we get the media back on track? And so that's what I think about when it comes to journalism. That does, I think, put me on the outlier where I think it's more important for you to have access to first sources than it is for me to try to bring the fire every time I talk to those people. We'll have some examples of this in the next few weeks about a style of interview that I think is different. And I think it's time for that. But we're seeing a lot of high pressure on these two different sectors, politicians and the press. And that's what I wanted to mention. I don't share my opinion on a lot of different things, but in this case, I do think it's important to point out one thing. The president in this interview, whether it was the rain or the heat or the questions or his birthday, there was a feeling of more pressure. And sometimes that happens with politicians. That pressure may be there one day and it's gone the next. But without a doubt, based on the things that I've listed, what happened in Congress last week, these big moments, milestones, personally and professionally for the president, it is worth a question about how that pressure is impacting his leadership and how he's prioritizing. And then there's also this question about what is the American media, what is the appropriate, healthy role of American media at this juncture in our history, 250 years in? Is the free press operating in a way that helps a free people make up their own mind and chart their own course? And that's a question I think we should keep coming back to. Because if you keep that intention at the center of all your reporting, at least for me, it helps me refocus when I do want to get up and get a little rowdy, about a topic. The question is that really about me? or is it about doing some work for the people? And in this way, obviously, there's a lot of people that don't agree that there was election fraud. And to Kristen Walker's point, we haven't seen a successful lawsuit prosecuted for that as of yet. Whether or not that matters to the president's been very consistent. He still thinks there's election fraud, and that is his personal belief. And he's operating in a professional capacity as a leader of the free world. So we have that. The question is, well, what's the next question we can ask to go a little bit deeper? And so that's what I'm thinking about today. So that's what we're looking at this week. I would keep an eye on the White House and the president, especially after this interview, especially after some admissions about some frustrations with Iran and moving ahead, and also with Israel. And also this, I hate to keep saying it. I keep saying the birthday, but I do think that's something that matters to people moving as we edge closer to America 250, and what the expectation for that was looking like for the administration versus the reality. So I want to keep an eye on how the president is what he's doing this week. I want to keep an eye on what this looks like for him. What does his public appearances look like? And I hope to see him again on Meet the Press, because their conversations in the past have been contentious, but they've also been very productive. And sometimes these blips happen. And like I said, there's a lot of ways to become more productive, but it's easy to Monday morning quarterback like I'm doing right now versus being in the middle of it. And so I say this with some humility, but just wanted to give you some perspective of what that's like in an interview. Look forward to your questions and comments, all of your thoughts as we inch closer to Flag Day, the president's birthday, America 250. We got a lot of big celebrations coming up, and I look forward to your thoughts. As always, we'll have more throughout the week on smarternews.com, where you go for quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. All right, guys, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.